A few hours ago in Shanghai, something happened that could change the entire Formula One season. Max Verstappen stepped out of the RB22 after qualifying, looked at the data, and realized something was very wrong. Not a small issue. Not a setup mistake. Something deeper. Because for the first time in years, Red Bull is not fighting for pole position. They are fighting just to stay in the top 10. Verstappen could only qualify 8th. His teammate Isaac Hadjar finished 9th. And the gap to pole position was more than 1.5 seconds. In modern Formula One, that kind of gap is enormous. But here is the detail that shocked the paddock. The RB22 is losing time in every single sector of the track. Corner entry, mid-corner stability, corner exit traction, and even on the longest straight in Shanghai. Which means this might not be one problem. It might be several. And according to the data Verstappen saw after qualifying, one hidden issue could explain everything. An inconsistency inside the hybrid power delivery. Something that can silently steal tenths of a second every lap. Something that drivers feel instantly. And something that engineers cannot fix overnight. But that is only part of the story. Because inside the paddock, analysts are already asking a much bigger question. Did Red Bull build a car with the wrong concept for the new era of Formula One? And if that question turns out to be true, the consequences could be massive. Because Mercedes is suddenly dominating. Ferrari looks stronger. McLaren is right there. And Red Bull, the team that ruled the sport, is now starting from the 4th row of the grid. So what exactly did Verstappen discover in the RB22 after qualifying in China? And why are engineers inside Red Bull suddenly under enormous pressure? Subscribe to the channel, because what happened in Shanghai may only be the beginning. Right after qualifying ended in Shanghai, the atmosphere inside the Red Bull garage felt very different from what the team is used to. Normally, qualifying ends with engineers celebrating. Drivers smiling. Mechanics already thinking about strategy for the race. But this time the mood was tense. Quiet. Because the result on the timing screen told a story nobody expected. Max Verstappen. 8th place. Isaac Hadjar. 9th place. Both cars in the final session of qualifying, yes. But completely disconnected from the fight for pole position. And the gap was impossible to ignore. More than 1.5 seconds from the fastest car. In the world of modern Formula One, that kind of difference is enormous. It means something fundamental is not working. But here is where the situation becomes even more uncomfortable for Red Bull. Because this was not a one-lap mistake. It was not traffic. It was not a driver error. The RB22 simply did not have the pace. Sector after sector, the car kept losing time. And when the engineers started comparing telemetry with the leading teams, the pattern became obvious. The deficit appeared everywhere. Corner entry. Mid-corner stability. Corner exit traction. Even the straight-line performance looked weaker than expected. Which immediately raised a serious question. Is the RB22 suffering from multiple problems at the same time? Because when a car loses time in just one sector, the solution is usually clear. Maybe you need more downforce. Maybe less drag. Maybe a different suspension setup. But when the car is slow everywhere, that usually means the issue is deeper. Much deeper. And that is exactly what Verstappen started to suspect as soon as he stepped out of the cockpit. During the cooldown lap after qualifying, his radio messages already sounded frustrated. Short answers. Little patience. Almost no confidence in the balance of the car. But the real moment of concern came later. When the engineers began reviewing the data from his fastest lap. Because Verstappen's lap was actually very clean. No big mistakes. No missed apex. No visible errors. Yet the stopwatch still showed a massive gap. And that is the kind of result that drivers hate the most. When you drive a good lap, and the car still cannot compete. But the data revealed something even more worrying. Because the RB22 was behaving differently from corner to corner. In some turns, the rear felt unstable. In others, the front refused to bite. Then suddenly the car would feel balanced again for a brief moment. And then the problem returned. That inconsistency is one of the worst traits a Formula One driver can face. Because confidence disappears instantly. And without confidence, pushing to the limit becomes impossible. But the deeper the engineers looked into the telemetry, the stranger the picture became. Because the balance issues alone did not explain the entire gap. There was another pattern hidden in the data. A pattern connected to the power delivery of the hybrid system. Small fluctuations. Tiny interruptions in energy deployment. Moments so short that fans watching on television would never notice. But moments that drivers feel immediately. Especially on a circuit like Shanghai. Because the back straight here is one of the longest acceleration zones in Formula One. And if the hybrid deployment hesitates for even a fraction of a second, the car loses speed instantly. That might sound small, but in qualifying, losing a few kilometers per hour at the start of a straight can cost several tenths by the end of it. And when engineers compared Verstappen's telemetry with the cars ahead, the difference became obvious. The RB22 was not accelerating as cleanly as the leaders, which leads to a very uncomfortable possibility. The issue may not be purely aerodynamic. It may also involve the power unit. And that possibility opens an entirely different level of concern inside Red Bull. Because this is the first season of the new power unit partnership with Ford. A completely new chapter for the team. A new architecture. New energy systems. New software controlling how power is deployed during a lap. Projects like this take time to stabilize. And early season problems are not unusual. But what Verstappen felt during qualifying suggests something more complicated. Because the problem does not appear every lap. Sometimes the deployment works perfectly. Sometimes it does not. And when a driver cannot predict how the car will respond on the straight, the entire lap becomes a gamble. But even that may not be the most worrying detail. Because the RB22 is also showing signs of something engineers call a very narrow operating window. And if that suspicion is correct, the implications could be far bigger than just one difficult qualifying session. Because a car with a narrow window can be extremely fast under perfect conditions, but almost impossible to optimize from track to track. And that detail might explain why the RB22 looked so uncomfortable during qualifying in China. But to understand why the RB22 feels so unstable, we need to go a little deeper. Because the problem Verstappen is feeling in the cockpit may not actually begin on the track. It may begin in the design philosophy of the car itself. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable for Red Bull. For years, the team built its dominance around one clear idea. Extreme aerodynamic efficiency. A car that produced massive downforce through the floor. Stable rear grip. And a balance that allowed Verstappen to attack every corner with total confidence. That philosophy worked perfectly under the previous regulations. But the 2026 era changed the equation. New power units. New energy deployment rules. Different aerodynamic sensitivities. Suddenly, every team had to rethink how the entire package worked together. Engine. Hybrid system. Cooling. Aerodynamics. Weight distribution. Everything became interconnected. And according to several analysts in the paddock, the RB22 may be suffering from a dangerous compromise between those elements. Because early in the design phase, the car was reportedly developed around one aerodynamic concept. A concept optimized for maximum efficiency through the floor. But later, the packaging demands of the new power unit forced adjustments. Cooling requirements changed. Energy system placement changed. Even the airflow around the rear of the car had to be modified. And when that happens, the original aerodynamic balance can collapse. Suddenly the floor no longer works exactly as designed. The diffuser becomes more sensitive. Rear stability becomes fragile. And the operating window shrinks dramatically. That phrase keeps appearing when engineers describe the RB22. A very narrow window. Meaning the car only performs well under extremely specific conditions. The tire temperature must be perfect. Ride height must be precise. Downforce balance must be exact. If any of those variables move slightly out of range, performance disappears immediately. That kind of behavior is devastating during a race weekend. Because every circuit demands different compromises. Different ride heights. Different wing levels. Different tire strategies. A car with a wide operating window adapts easily. A car with a narrow one becomes unpredictable. And that is exactly what both Red Bull drivers described after qualifying. Verstappen talked about a rear end that refuses to stay planted. A car that feels nervous entering corners, floating through the middle, and completely lacking traction on exit. Then Hadjar delivered a similar message. Almost identical. The car feels sticky on entry, then suddenly dead on corner exit. Two drivers. Two completely different driving styles. Yet both describing the same problems. When that happens, engineers know something important. The issue is not the driver. The issue is the car. But one part of the Shanghai circuit exposed the weakness of the RB22 more than anywhere else. The famous opening sequence of corners. Turns 1 and 2. A long spiral that tightens endlessly. Drivers enter at high speed. Then gradually increase steering angle while braking and balancing throttle. It is one of the most demanding sections for aerodynamic stability. And during qualifying, the Red Bull looked uncomfortable there. Small corrections from Verstappen. The rear moving slightly. The car refusing to rotate smoothly. Those moments might look small on television. But they cost time. And more importantly, they destroy driver confidence. Because if the rear of the car feels unstable in a corner that long, the driver instinctively lifts the throttle. Just a fraction. But that fraction costs tenths of a second. Now imagine that happening multiple times in a single lap. Suddenly the stopwatch starts showing a massive deficit. And this is where another rumor inside the paddock begins to make sense. Some insiders believe Red Bull brought a small experimental floor modification to Shanghai. Nothing dramatic. Just a subtle adjustment to the edge of the floor and diffuser interaction. The goal was simple. Improve rear stability. Increase downforce in long corners. But according to several whispers in the paddock, the change may not have worked as expected. In fact, it might have made the car even more sensitive to ride height and airflow disruption. Which would explain why the RB22 looked inconsistent from corner to corner during qualifying. And if that rumor turns out to be true, the implications become serious. Because the floor is the heart of a modern Formula One car. If the floor concept is unstable, the entire aerodynamic balance collapses. And fixing that kind of problem is not a quick adjustment. It can require months of development. Sometimes an entirely new design. But here is the detail that makes the situation even more tense. Because while Red Bull is struggling to understand its car, the competition is not waiting. Mercedes just locked the front row in China. Ferrari is consistently fighting at the front. McLaren looks extremely competitive. And suddenly, Red Bull finds itself in unfamiliar territory. Not defending victories, but trying to understand why their car is no longer the fastest. Which leads to an even bigger question. Because if the RB22 is already struggling in only the second race of the season, what happens when the championship battle truly begins?